What if some of the biggest things we've been told about aging are actually wrong? Because the truth is, much of what we believe about aging isn't based on what's possible, it's based on outdated thinking. And that matters because those beliefs can shape how we live and how we age. If you're new here, I'm Clare Johnston, a journalist in my 50s exploring how to age well, look and feel good for longer. And today I'm joined by Dr Hussain Al-Zubaidi, a lifestyle doctor and performance coach frequently seen on television here in the UK, and who works with patients and athletes to optimise health and function across the lifespan. He's also supporting the charity Age UK's Act Now, Age Better campaign, encouraging us to take steps now to live better for longer.
And if you look at all the different patients that you see where they get to this age and they're still doing the things that they love, there is a very common thread.
So today we're breaking down the biggest myths about aging.
Biohacking makes me really angry.
What's holding us back?
For many people, they view aging as a scary thing that they just want to put to the back of their mind and they'll worry about when it comes.
And what's actually possible when we get the fundamentals right. Dr Hussain, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I know as a lifestyle doctor and a performance coach, you are focused on how we can best support our health and fitness to thrive throughout life. And exercise and athleticism are a big part of your own life. Can you tell us a little bit about your own background in athletics?
Yeah, absolutely. So through school, sport and physical activity was very much not promoted by my parents. Instead, there was a real focus on academia, and they saw that that was the best way to ensure that I had a prosperous, thriving life. And I'm very grateful for that focus. In many ways, it got me into medicine, etc. But I built up a real negative view of exercise. I saw it as a sort of punishment for, let's say, overindulging and just as a way to lose weight. And that brings me on to the real challenge that I had, because as I went through my teenage years and particularly through my early 20s through university and then my junior doctor years, I gained a huge amount of weight. Like I went into uni at about 68 kilos. And I remember the next time I weighed myself, which sounds astonishing because it'd been years, was when I was my first year out of university. So this is 7 years down the line. And I was now 96 kilos. And I hadn't fully consciously realized that. And it took my a test that happened on my blood where they looked for a response to a vaccine, which we have to get done as part of our training. And they found that my liver was highly inflamed. So they did a scan of the liver and it picked up a lot of fat that had infiltrated the liver.
At such a young age?
Oh, yeah, totally. 24, 25 years of age. And what's a shame is that actually that isn't as surprising as it may sound, because 20 to 30% of the UK population had the same condition that I had. Now, the technical term is called MASLD, which is metabolically associated steatotic liver disease. But essentially what it is fat infiltration in the liver. And it was the sonographer telling me that I actually had one of the fattest livers that he'd ever seen was the kind of wake-up call for me that I needed to do something. And so I was looking in the research as to how do we manage it? Because the clinicians at the time said we don't have any treatments for it. There are no good medications that you can take, etc. And they didn't tell me about what could be done in my own lifestyle. And I'm still surprised as to why they didn't do that. Because actually, when I looked through the evidence, there was a huge amount to suggest that both improving my diet, reducing, for example, saturated fat, increasing my physical activity, lowering stress levels, these could all play a big role in reversing that. And it took a number of years. It wasn't like within 6 months I transformed my health, but over about 8 years, I slowly got to a point where I shifted my view of exercise to where it was just movement that I enjoyed, that I liked doing. And I thrived feeling how my body got stronger and I could do more with it. And I got from one point where I couldn't even run down the street to now I'm competing with Team GB at long distance triathlon of all disciplines. The one that takes the longest seems to be the one that I've taken on. So I think if there's one message I'll get across is that what you think you are capable of, or like who you are, give yourself time and space to maybe rethink that every now and again. Because if you asked me 12, 13 years ago if I was someone that enjoyed exercise, I'd have told you, no, I'm not built for it. I'm not talented at it. I was always picked last at school, and it's just not for me. I literally said that thing numerous times.
Oh, that is such an extraordinary story. I didn't know the half of that, and thank you for sharing it. I mean, to have that happen at such a young age and be able to turn it around like that, so that you are now doing such endurance activities. I mean, that doesn't get much tougher than an Ironman. I wonder what the 18-year-old you might have thought as you walked through the doors of university, and probably your self-esteem was rock bottom back then as well, I can imagine.
100%. You know, when I look back, you know, a lot of people have lots of photos of their university experience, and like social media was a thing back then. Like we were using Facebook back then, but if you go back to those years, there are minimal photos, and if there are any photos, I'm not really in it. Like I'm just somehow obscuring viewing me and my body as a whole, and I didn't fully acknowledge that that's what I was doing. Like if you asked me at the time, were you like specifically avoiding seeing it, viewing it, etc.? Yeah, like when you go into elevators, I would always turn around. You know, as soon as the doors open, I would not want to look at that mirror. And like, I think I didn't fully appreciate it until later on when I noticed my behavior changing, where I would stop to look in the mirror. And that took a long time. And I remember when I qualified for my first ever world championships, I went over to my wife at the start because I just felt so overwhelmed. Just like, Shanaz, like, have you seen these guys? They are weapons. What the hell am I doing here? And she goes, have you seen yourself? You know, you're not that same person anymore. And like, it takes a long time to rewrite a lot of the sort of beliefs that you have of yourself, but they can be rewritten slowly and with perseverance and with a bit of compassion to yourself, because that takes time. I think we can sometimes be our worst critic.
It's wonderful in a way that you have had that experience, because you bring so much to the work you do now. And we're going to be talking about how we can make those kind of changes at any age, but you are just such a great example. We were introduced, and I see your t-shirt there, your shirt there, you're emblazoned with it. We were introduced through the charity Age UK, and you are supporting their Act Now, Age Better campaign there, as we can see. That encourages people from midlife onwards to exercise, to help them live their best possible lives for longer. And before we get into some of the myths that might be holding us back from doing that, how important do you think it is to think about and physically and maybe even mentally prepare too for what we want our later life to look like long before we get there?
I think it's vitally important, and I think it's probably the most important thing you should do, mainly because all the things that you may want to consider in your life will stem off the ability for you to do it. Many of the things that we take for granted right now, like getting out of the chair, going to grab a bite to eat with friends, carrying the shopping, going up the stairs, maybe 2 steps at a time quickly, like all these things, they can feel very easy now. But what we have to realize is as years go by, things become more difficult, especially if you do not put in investment now to ensure that you can get to those ages of 70, 80, 90 and beyond with the health and the functioning to allow you to keep enjoying those things. I think for many people, they view aging as a scary thing that they just want to put to the back of their mind and they'll worry about when it comes. But sadly, if you do that strategy and you worry about it when it comes, you've very much lost the ability to make a lot of work to build it up now. It's just like, for example, while you're working, most of us will think about a pension, you know, to ensure that when we get to whichever age that is, that your retirement, that you have something to rely on. We don't just sort of think that, oh, we'll just sort it out when it comes. So think of what we do now as that pension, building it up so that when you get to those years, you thrive, you enjoy. And if I give you 2 different examples, you know, when I work as a GP, I see a wide range of 80 and 90-year-olds, a wide range. Some of them, they have to see me downstairs in the downstairs clinical office because my room's upstairs because they can't do the stairs. Some of them struggle even to come to the surgery. I have to go on a home visit. Well, there's one gentleman who he's always happy me sharing his name, because I asked him, I said, I'll keep it anonymous. He goes, you better not. I want everyone knowing who I am. And Dennis Brown, 97 years old, he doesn't just come up the stairs to see me, because I actually automatically said, I went downstairs and said, I'll see you downstairs, because I assumed that at 97 he wouldn't be able to do the stairs. Not only did he do the stairs, he did them 2 steps at a time. Okay, he was rushing me up just to demonstrate how quick he was, and he cycled to the surgery. He was 97 years old. I loaded up his medical record, and I couldn't see much on there. And I was like something must be wrong. Like, surely you'd have some conditions, some medications, etc. And if you look at all the different patients that you see where they get to this age and they're still doing the things that they love, there is a very common thread. And that is that they are able to find ways to consistently move their bodies. Not Herculean amounts. When I asked Dennis what was his exercise routine, he said, I did 15 minutes every day. I just did 15 minutes every day. He said, when I was younger, I did more. But nowadays, I find that I do 15 minutes. I do 10 minutes when I wake up, and I do 5 minutes after dinner, and it keeps me tickety-boo. But it's that kind of approach where he told me, he said, what I do now is very different to what I did when I was 40, 50, 60. But as the decades went on, I just adapted. I used to love playing rugby and different sports, and then I moved over to cycling, and then I started to explore lawn bowls and yoga in the gym. Then I really liked hiking and walking in the community groups. And I think what's really important is that we look to evolve and try out different things as we go through the life course.
Oh boy, do I love the sound of Dennis Brown. You tell him he's got a fan in Edinburgh already. I just love to hear it. And I think it leads us beautifully into some of those misconceptions, which Dennis clearly didn't have, about what it means when we age. The biggest lie, which I think I believed myself most of my life until I saw for my own eyes, my parents turn this around, is that frailty is just part of getting old. That's just old age. Or is it?
It's a very good question.
What do you think about that?
It's a very good question. So what's undeniable is that as we get older, our maximum optimal functioning will decrease. Okay, so that line will slowly come down. There is no running away from that. But where that line is, as to where you eventually end your life, your lifespan, that is the key. Because if you push that line up as high as possible, especially if you start working at your younger ages, 30, 40, 50 years old, then although the line's curved down, as long as it sits above the threshold for things that you still enjoy, like, being independent, washing yourself, walking briskly, carrying shopping, if that line sits above, then it means that you will minimize the time spent with a poor quality of life and poor health. And we see this time and time again, where different people will have different lengths of what we call health spans, the number of years that you have with good quality of life. And we can very much control how many years we have within frailty, where some it can be a very few number of years. Well, for others, and in fact, a large proportion of our population nowadays, they can spend up to 25, 30 years with ill health, developing a number of the long-term conditions in their 50s. And it's really sad, and it's really upsetting, because it's a lot of suffering that goes through, and many of these conditions are conditions that can be managed. Now, there's a lot that we can do as individuals, but I'll always come down to the fact that there are a number of social determinants that play a big factor. Socioeconomic deciles, as well as communities that are underserved. These all play a significant element, whether it be physical or mental disabilities. We know that will increase or decrease that number. And if you look at, for example, the most affluent 10% and the least affluent 10%, there is a difference of about 15 to 20 years in healthy life expectancy. So this isn't the number of years they live. Forget about that. Just about years that they have good quality of life. Where those in the lowest decile will expect ill health in their late 40s, while those in the highest will expect ill health in the sort of mid to late 60s. So a big difference there. And so what I really want to try and do is empower people from all backgrounds to find a reason to invest into that longer health, because we all need it no matter who we are.
Our expectation is probably a huge part of that as well, I would imagine. I know that there's been studies that have shown that people who expect old age to only go one way and to live a number of years in poor health and being frail and so on, that it actually often plays out in what does actually happen with their life. I think they measured, there was something like a 7-year lifespan difference between those who had an earlier life reported feeling optimistic about their later life and those who had been pessimistic. And, you know, I'm sure that socioeconomic factors, as you say, will play a role in that too. And also, you know, the sort of people feeling like they can't afford to join a gym or whatever it is to help turn things around. I mean, you mentioned Dennis there. He's got his bike. He's doing his 15 minutes of fitness. I mean, what simple things can people do at this stage in life to ensure health and function for as long as possible?
Yeah. I think we're often sold that health and healthy lifestyles must be expensive, with you know expensive memberships, expensive equipment, expensive clothing. When in reality, movement is one of the few free things that we still have in life. Now, don't get me wrong, there are forms of movement where you do need to pay, and I do pay for them and I do enjoy them and they're worth it. I think they're a good investment. But for many of the movements that we can do, they can be free. So when we talk about Dennis and his 15-minute routine, he actually walks me through it. And it involves some light stretching that he followed along on a video that he had called Love to Move that British Gymnastics had done. It involved doing some chair-based exercises while he was having breakfast and drinking his coffee. And it involved the 5 minutes at the end of the day, just going for a walk around his house after dinner, because he found that it helped him settle the food that he digested. And those things, they're all free. And there are so many free community groups out there. So yes, if you want to invest more and you want to get more specificity and more kind of unique form of training, you've got that. Brilliant. I think it's a worthwhile investment. But if you also feel like at the moment finances are really difficult, then you can adapt. And there are so many free groups, free movements that you can do. That is fun. For example, one of the things that I love to do is dance. And my wife is an incredible dancer. And what I'll tend to always do is while we're preparing food just before, I'll put on a song, because I know that as soon as I put on that music, she starts dancing and I can't help but dance with her. And for anyone that has danced before, you'll know that it's a fantastic workout. Gets your heart rate up. It's good for balance, good for coordination, and it's a great way to socialize with people. Like when you are exercising, you don't have to exercise drenched in sweat, in pain. Movement can very much be a joyful and fun experience.
And just to pick up there on the after dinner walk, that's very interesting, because again, there's been research showing that a walk after dinner for 10, 15 minutes, something like that, not only does it help you digest your food better, but it lowers those blood sugar spikes that can trip us up as we get older, helping us regulate our blood sugars. So, I mean, that's 100%. An interesting one that Dennis followed there.
Yeah. In fact, on a diabetes course that I was teaching for healthcare professionals, we did a mini experiment where I had a jam and banana white bread sandwich in the morning. And then we tested my blood sugars an hour later. And then in the afternoon, had the same sandwich, but then went for a walk with the delegates as well, just for 20 minutes, and again measured. And what was remarkable was in the morning, when I took that jam sandwich, it spiked my blood sugar by about 3 or 4 points. But in the afternoon, my blood sugar levels actually decreased. So it was just slightly down from where it was before the sandwich. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it makes sense, because when you think of your muscles, these are metabolically active organs. They store your sugar as glycogen. And when you are active, you are utilizing those stores within the muscles. So creating more space for new sugar that comes in via food to essentially fill up those car parks within your muscles. So that's one of the key things as we age. If there's a currency that we're trying to build in that pension, then muscle function and amounts have to be key parts of that.
I'm sure I have certain viewers and listeners that think probably I talk about muscle too much, but
you can't.
I know. I think the reason I do is that very thing that you just discussed there. As somebody who's been exploring how to age well and looking at the research and so on, and trying to apply it to my own parents who are in their 80s, which is what has motivated me so much to try and get this right. It's muscle. They always had a pretty good diet, and they're kind of optimistic people, but they just expected that life would go one way as well, because that's what we were always told, But once they started training with weights and building their muscle, boy, has everything changed, head to toe. And I think seeing the difference that it's made to them, and also understanding that we're just not told about it enough. You mentioned how when you spoke with a doctor about, what you would have to do to turn your own health situation around, you were surprised that these lifestyle changes weren't discussed. And that is something that comes up over and over again. I'm sure something you would agree we need to change, really.
Yeah, it's sadly still the case that the vast majority of clinicians, they do not have the awareness, the training, or the confidence to talk about lifestyle medicine. It's something that in my work as the Royal College of GPs lifestyle lead we're trying to remedy that, but it is decades of curriculum and culture that needs to get sort of rewritten, and it is not easy. I'm trying my best, but still, for the majority of people that they go and see the clinician, these kind of key elements, these things that we can do, that we can take control of our health, they're not being discussed. And one of the key reasons why I had such negative impact from the extra weight that I had was because although I had gained a fair bit of fat, I was very much under-muscled. I was within the sarcopenic category. So it wasn't just because when I looked in the mirror, yes, I was overweight. My BMI was in the sort of 28, 29 category. So high, but not so high that I thought my liver was now starting to, cause real issues. And that's because I had what's called lean obesity, which is where I lacked the muscle. So that sarcopenic component meant that I had the health impacts of the increased weight, but also the health impacts of the lack of muscle to resist many of the metabolic changes that were happening. And sadly, those from certain ethnicities, including my own, are much more prone to getting this form of metabolic ill health, because when we put on fat, we put it on more predominantly within our visceral, so within our sort of ectopic sites like your liver, your pancreas, and your muscle, rather than just subcutaneously what you can visualize. And we also are less likely to have higher levels of muscle compared to certain ethnicities. So when I speak about these ethnicities, I'm talking about South Asian, Middle Eastern. And it's awareness of that and understanding that, okay, I need to get active, but I also need to improve my muscle and my body fat percentage. That's what really enabled me to see significant changes in my liver. And I remember the face of some of the clinicians when I went to follow up and they were doing the scans then again. They went, what's happened? Like it's pretty much all gone on that first scan. And then on subsequent ones, it had all gone because they didn't have it within their mindset that was possible. They didn't even realize that the evidence was already there to support physical activity, optimizing body composition, that could have a big difference in a condition like MASLD, like fatty liver disease.
Similarly, my mum, we paid for a private DEXA scan in December last year because she had been lifting weights to improve her muscle mass, but we saw there had been a near 7% increase in her bone density in her spine.
Exactly.
Since she started lifting. And she just recently got called for her NHS DEXA scan. So viewers outside the UK, that's our health service. That's the one that's sort of prepaid. She got her DEXA scan. Now we're having to wait 10 weeks.
That's not actually that bad on the scale of things.
I know, but I can't wait. She's had the scan, so we're just waiting for her doctor to discuss the results with her. And I just can't wait for that conversation because I want them to ask, what have you been doing at 83 to improve your, we need 100%. To recheck these results. I mean,
that kind of improvement is
surprising.
Like astonishing. Like it's fantastic. And you couldn't get that from the medications that we give. So we give bisphosphonates for lower bone density, and they generally just try to minimize the further reduction. Like you tend to not see transformatory increases. But when you start weight training, in particular in someone that is untrained, that's the other benefit here. The biggest benefits come from those that haven't done any training. Because even small amounts of resistance training will create a really big stimulus. In fact, when it happens, like for someone like me that's now been training for 8-9 years, like I'm now getting tiny little improvements over many months. Yeah. But in those first few months, oh my goodness,
yes,
you get so many benefits and you don't have to do huge amounts. We're just talking about twice a week. If you can get 20 minutes minimum, it would just really be transformatory. Things beyond that, excellent if you can, but the majority of the benefits come in those first 2 20-minute sessions in a week.
It's just wonderful that what we're talking about here can happen at any age. You can make those changes at any age. I want to come on to the next big myth. This is one I hear a lot actually in my comments section when I show people my parents weightlifting. They say, older people shouldn't overexert themselves. That's dangerous, through heavy lifting or getting out of breath. You shouldn't be doing that once you're over 65, 70, What is the truth behind that?
The truth behind that is the human body is exceptionally intelligent and it knows your limits. Okay. In fact, if you speak to any athlete, you'll know that I wish it didn't, because it will constantly stop me well before my physiological limit comes. And the best athletes are the ones that can somehow override that incredible safety system to just eke out that little bit more that's in there. But think of it kind of like a computer system that just knows when you've reached that limit. It starts putting brakes on. So if you are not getting that brain telling you, oh, no, that's too much. Oh, we can't maintain that for any longer. Please stop. Then you are not within those limits. And what you'll find is as time goes on, maybe what you can do will slowly decrease to get to that point where you feel like, oh, okay, I feel like I've done enough. I've reached, for example, voluntary fatigue failure on a rep that I'm doing, or my breathing has now become quite difficult that I can't really go much faster or further. That's there for that reason. And it's actually within a safety parameter. It doesn't come on just when things are now really difficult. It comes on well before that. And what we train, in fact, is that ability to go beyond it. So one of the trials that I run at Loughborough University is we look at people's lactate levels. So lactate is a compound that builds up when you go beyond your capacity into what we call anaerobic activity. And when we look at non-trained, non-athletes, they will reach what they think is the complete end, and the lactate's like 3 or 4, which is above normal, but it's not really that high for an athlete. For example, myself, I did a lactate threshold 2 weeks ago. I reached 17. So what happens there is that I've learned to train to go just that bit beyond. Now, that is for performance competition. But for the majority of us out there, let's say older people above 65, doing their training, doing their running, doing their cycling, whatever that may be, trust me, you will know if you're going beyond your limits, because it will feel like absolute agony. So if you don't want to go into that range, you don't have to, because apart from the competitive edge, there's no need really to go into that. So when we look at resistance training, getting to within 1 or 2 reps of that point of failure is also, you're going to get nearly all of the benefits. Same with aerobic activity. Not having to go beyond your lactate threshold, you're getting nearly all of the metabolic and cardiovascular benefits. So you can very much still work within a repertoire and still push yourself, and you will be able to tell when you've reached your limit and when you're not.
And somebody who is, say, over 65, is very overweight, really lives quite a sedentary life, and will be probably worried about having a heart attack, to put it bluntly, if they break into a light jog. What's your advice around how to start?
When you have significant long-term conditions, like the ones you've just mentioned, absolutely there are a number of barriers, both physical and mental, that make it difficult when you're starting that journey of movement. Now, work that I've done alongside a number of the other faculties of medicine was in 2022, we produced a consensus statement to support people with long-term conditions when they're getting active. And there were 6 key kind of rules that came about. Now, the chief amongst them that I would suggest is, 1, is you listen to your body. If you're getting pains, discomforts, things that you find is very difficult, come and speak to us. Speak to a healthcare professional, let them know, and we can see and work out how to support you. Second is you start low and you go slow. You may have been able to do certain things a decade ago when you were last physically active. Don't assume that you can do that now. So start at a level that you feel comfortable with, and work within the soft margins of discomfort. There is no need to push yourself. It's no pain, no gain. Like that is just, that just doesn't work for nearly everyone. So instead, just focus on doing what you can and do that little bit more than you think you can, and see how that goes. And your body will respond over time. The next thing is, think about how you can adapt the movement that you choose based on some of the challenges that you're facing. So let's say you're struggling with weight. A lot of people, they go to Couch to 5K as that first place to get active, but I'm not sure that that's probably the best thing for everyone. Although I absolutely love running, we do need to bear in mind that there may be other activities that you're going to find easier, less strain, that you can get into, and then it could be something that you come to later on. Well, maybe in 12 months' time, once you've maybe improved your strength, improved your fitness, improved your joints. Things like swimming, things like various different sports, dancing, gardening. There's so many things that you can do just to start that journey. Try not to go from 0 to 100 like that. Something like, for example, running, it can be a very difficult thing to take on. And then a lot of people, they try it. They don't manage it for one reason or another because it's exceptionally difficult. And then they stop completely without realizing that there's a number of other steps that there may be along that journey that you can find the movement that works. So really try and open your mind as to what you could take on first. Doesn't have to be the obvious thing. It can be something maybe off the beaten track.
I mean, on the weightlifting front, very similarly, I mean, people see my dad, who's just about to turn 82 now, lifting 95 kilos from the floor, and wonder how on earth that happened. But what that looked like was, just 15 months ago, he started by lifting, what was it, around 30, 40 we started out with for him, because he's always been, quite active, Mr. DIY. And he added like a kilo a week. Sometimes it was half a kilo. Sometimes he had to go back a little bit and then work his way back up. And when you talk about those margins of kind of mild, did you call it discomfort or something else?
Yeah, so it's the margins of discomfort, like because a lot of people, when they get active, they just go beyond that, and they feel, oh, it's achy, it's painful, I can't move for a few days. We don't want to try and do that. We want to slowly build up. Just get into the soft margins of discomfort, and that's a good place to be. There's no need to be in agony, and I see so many people, I'm looking at them and they look like they're about to pass out and they're clearly on their journey of running. But when you look at, let's say, people like myself that are accomplished runners that are running all the time, just look and just think, do they look like they're in discomfort? Because we won't. We actually look very chill. I can hold a full conversation. I could have done this podcast while running about. It comes over time, because when I first started, like that, what used to be kind of my maximum effort is now no longer even my warm-up, because the body, like with your father, slowly incrementing those kilos, you get to a point where what you couldn't even barely achieve before now is effortless. And I'm still just working in that same region of within my comfort zone, and then that soft margin of discomfort, which I will continually work on to see where I can get to and slowly push. But there's no need to go for all out, like just work within your realm, push your boundaries and slowly build it up. Don't suddenly try and deadlift 120 kilos. Start with something smaller that you can feel like you can achieve, and you get to that point where, now it's a bit difficult, and then just slowly building it up, and you'll see where you get.
A big misconception is that you get to a point in life where it is just too late to start to really make a difference. We're like, okay, well, it might make me a bit fitter, but that's not going to really change my mobility problem. I'm somebody who can't get out of a chair. Nothing's going to change that now. I'm 70 years old. I'm done. What do you say to them who maybe feel it's just too late to make a change?
Yeah, like I totally get it. When we have certain barriers that are maybe unique to us or are particularly challenging, it can really demotivate us as to what could be achievable. A lot of the reasons because we compare ourselves to others and we feel like I don't want to put that work in because I can't do that. And maybe that's true. Maybe you can't do what that other person did because the luck wasn't in your core. However, there is always something you can do, regardless of the age. And I know this not just because the evidence shows this in time and time again when we look at physical activity supporting health in the later years, but because in the work that I've done in my NHS practice, where we support people with a number of physical activity groups, which we offer for free, and we specifically include people with long-term conditions and older age, it is remarkable what they can do. In fact, a week and a half ago, I had a patient that was running up to me as I was about to get on my bicycle outside of the practice. And I couldn't quite recognize him because he was running to me, and I was worried he was going to come and complain about something because he was coming at me pretty quick. Luckily, he wasn't complaining. And what he came to do, he said, "You had a chat with me 2 years ago, and you said that it was safe and it was okay for me to start exercising despite having osteoarthritis of my knee. Someone before me 10, 15 years ago had said that, no, rest, do not put any weight through it, be careful, etc." And he said, I can now walk regularly, I now go to the gym regularly, and I swim regularly. And I didn't recognize him because when he came to see me, he was walking with a walking stick, very slowly and very carefully. And the man that was running towards me was not that same man, despite 2 years going down the track. And it was just remarkable what could be achieved. And he's just one of many where you can see the confidence grow. And what is great is, yes, they can move a bit more. That's brilliant. But what that means is so much more than that. So for these patients, it means that they're now spending more time socializing. They're now more confidently going out there and just enjoying life more, getting more from it, because your retirement years shouldn't be years visiting the doctor, taking medications, and just, waiting for the day to come. It should be time where finally you can enjoy yourself. You can find out the things that you want to do. And you can only do that with the foundation of a functioning body that enables you to go out and explore, whether it is traveling or trying different foods or learning new things. The body is the vehicle that allows that. So we must really invest in it.
When you mentioned that patient who 10, 15 years before had been told, look, don't trouble that knee. I also hear that a lot in the comments. And I mean, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical expert. I don't like to say to people who maybe say, well, I couldn't do any weight training because my doctor has told me that I shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
Very difficult for me to say. I'll point them to some resource.
Totally. It's difficult for me to unwrite it because like it's when these things get said, I think clinicians don't realize that the patient sort of writes it in stone, and it then suddenly changes their whole life. He was just transformed to going, I've got osteoarthritis of my knee. I must be really cautious with it, really careful with it. And you may think, okay, well, he's not going to be able to be physically active and he's going to miss out on those benefits. But it's far greater than that, because by now becoming much more sedentary, he actually retired from work early because he just wasn't able to do his job as much as he could before, having to avoid putting any weight through the knee. His mood dipped significantly. He struggled a lot with low self-esteem, low mood, anxiety. His diabetes worsened because being sedentary and the impact of not wanting to put weight through the knee worsened his glycemic control. And these things just compounded. So when I had to have a conversation with him, it took a while, and he found it quite difficult for me to be saying the complete opposite to him. And it took me having to show him the NICE guidelines. So this is the National Institute for Clinical Excellence. These are the guidelines that in the UK we are told to follow. And in the NICE guidance for osteoarthritis, it states as the number one treatment above any medication or surgical procedure is physical activity through a combination of resistance training, in particular the affected joint, strengthening the muscles above and below it, and aerobic activity. So the exact number one treatment for this condition was the very thing that many clinicians are telling their patients to not do. And we can't blame the guidelines, because a lot of people say, the guidelines in over 90 guidelines, physical activity is put as nearly one or number two in the management treatment for many long-term conditions. Yet time and time again, clinicians do not talk about it, whether it's the lack of confidence, the lack of knowledge, or the lack of skill set to have these conversations. But it means that the patient loses out.
Oh, that's so interesting, because I always thought it must be a guidelines issue. They just don't feel that they can go beyond the guidelines. And now I know where I can refer people to. I can link to those guidelines. But it's interesting because I noticed when I was comparing my mum's DEXA scans, I noticed that on the last one she had, the NHS DEXA scan she had, that was showing her in the osteopenia range, on the notes on the bottom of her scan, which we had her GP surgery sent to us,
I know exactly what it said.
It did actually recommend resistance training. But she had not seen her scan results. We had to request them so I could look at them. And nobody had suggested that to her, which is extraordinary, isn't it?
Yep.
And
And
there
that's
it
on
was.
every scan. Every scan, it says that. Like it's in the template. They're forced to put it in. Yet it just doesn't get spoken about. And I know some reasons why it isn't spoken about, and it's sort of a lack of time, a lack of sort of confidence knowing what, because if the patient then goes, oh, what is resistance training? Sadly, many healthcare professionals will be a bit, I don't know, going to the gym. And so without that knowledge and experience, they can't have these conversations, when in reality, the best treatment to improve her bone density is the resistance training. It's not a little add-on, oh, that would be
Yes.
nice. It would be
Yep.
transformatory, especially for those that aren't doing it already. It would really help massively, but we are leaving so much on the table. So much on the table. And when we think about the pressures that the NHS is under, it would be so well supported if we had these conversations. Because my experience is, not all of them, but many patients respond brilliantly to getting that kind of information and thinking, oh, this is something I can do, because
Yeah.
I don't want to just do the instructions and take this pill and take that. I want to do something to support my health. And we know from the evidence that 1 in 9 patients that are spoken about physical activity will significantly increase the physical activity levels. When we compare that to smoking, you'd need to speak to, it's 1 in 120. So we have conversations about smoking all the time. It's kind of built in. It's in our DNA. We encourage people to stop smoking, despite the evidence showing that it doesn't really make a significant difference. 1 in 120 before you'll get someone that listens. But 1 in 9? Like, that's really good. That's actually fantastic. And if we actually improved our skills, I suspect we'd improve that figure yet more if we had that confidence, if we were able to encourage and inspire people to build this in. Because they do listen to their clinician. They do listen.
Yes.
Yet at the moment, they're not saying in always the right things in this regard, sadly.
Yeah, it feels like we need a resource, just a page that a GP could give somebody the URL, or send them to a site, how to get started resistance training, so they don't have to have. Well, it's quite a difficult conversation, when
And it
basically
exists.
you need some guidance.
Claire, it exists, honestly. So it's called Moving Medicine. It's a free resource. It's called Moving Medicine. It was created by the Faculty of Sport and Exercise Medicine, funded by the National Lottery. It is brilliant. Not only does it talk about resistance training, it will specify it for each individual condition. So I can pick, for example, menopause, or I can pick cancer of any type, you know what I mean? And it has so much brilliant information. I've supported in its creation. And in fact, one way we've got around it, because sadly not enough healthcare professionals actually view that platform, despite it being there and existing, is it's now available for patients. So I'd highly recommend, if you're listening to this and you have a condition, you're like, I don't know what adaptations I should do, I don't know what's safe, go on the Moving Medicine website, completely free, pop in which condition it is, or conditions that relate to you, and it will give you specific information that is vetted by experts in this field. So I would highly recommend going on there. If we can't get the clinicians to go on there, let's at least get the patients on there so they can start empowering themselves with knowledge.
Okay, we're going to link that below. It'll be on screen as I speak. And let's go and take a look at it. That's fantastic that exists. I want to come to another myth that I think is kind of perpetuated now as well, because we look at those biohackers, those people who are going to extremes to live sort of longer, healthier lives. Interesting as some kind of semi-scientific project, but the message it puts across to people is that you need all these, you need to be injecting yourselves with peptides now, and you need very expensive supplements, and you need to be linked up to all kinds of machines at night that regulate your temperature. And what is the reality of what we need? I mean, I take a vitamin D supplement. That's recommended.
Very sound.
Health guidance. I think that's really helpful. But what's the reality of what we need in terms of supplements and all these other things that are available now?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, biohacking makes me really angry, not because I don't mind them doing it as their own little experiment to find out, that's totally fine, but the issue is it's very alluring to the everyday person that instead of focusing on the key pillars of lifestyle where you get 99.999% of the benefit, they are instead spending limited amounts of money on very expensive things that have either no evidence or minute evidence in rodents or pigs or cows, wherever we've done the study on. And you haven't even confirmed safety in humans. So like definitely I would encourage people to stay well away from peptides and all that link. There may well be in the future that we develop stuff that will work. And trust me, as soon as we have one that we have proven is safe and that has good clinical benefit, the pharmaceutical industries will be selling that left, right, center. You wouldn't have to get it from random places where it says not safe for human consumption on the side. Like, trust me, they are very good at making money from anything that has benefit. Now, what would we focus on? Yeah, vitamin D you've touched on, really important. For everyone, and particularly in the winter, and from those from darker skins, or they spend less time outdoors for one reason or another, I'd encourage that throughout the year. In terms of other things, there is no other supplement where I can confidently tell you that that's going to make a difference, any difference that I can measurably attain. The key benefits come from physical activity, good, healthy nutrition, healthy relationships. Okay, and I really mean that. That is not just the relationship with your partner beyond the sort of sexual relationship. I'm talking about a healthy relationship with your colleagues, with the people on your street, with your community. Minimizing harmful substances and behaviors. So that's minimizing things like alcohol, smoking, and also things like social media and other behaviors like gambling, etc., which you may be finding difficult to manage. Now, many of these things can be positive if you're getting content that is supporting your health journey. If you're finding that you're doom scrolling, seeing a lot of negativity, etc., it won't be helping. Then it's about sleep. And this isn't about random sleep trackers, okay? It's about just trying to improve the general quality of the sleep that you're doing by shifting the environment to make sure that it's not noisy where you can, it's not too bright, the temperature is good. And then the final thing, which is just so important, is around stress. Because I know not all the stresses in our life we can control, but we can control more than you think. And sometimes it's making a difficult decision. Like for me, one of the key things that helped me improve my lifestyle was realizing that I couldn't work 7 to 7, Monday to Friday, and then on-call shifts and expect to be able to lead a healthy lifestyle. I was just burnt out. I just didn't have any energy, so I actually reduced my hours. And it meant that I had to make certain sacrifices on pay, because there's no point me having slightly more on my bank account if I don't have the health to enjoy it. So there are various different stresses that we can manage in order to reduce that. So those are the key pillars. That's where you get your evidence from. In terms of supplements, it's vitamin D, that's useful. And then anything that you are identified as being low in. So for example, if you have a blood test and your ferritin's low, then absolutely you need some iron supplements. If you have a blood test and your B12 is low, grab some B12. If you are someone that is at high risk of low B12, for example, you're vegan or you're predominantly plant-based, take vitamin B12 supplements. Excellent. But outside of that, although they look fancy, although they sound great, there isn't evidence that I can confidently tell you that's going to make a difference.
It leads me to my last myth that I see quite a bit, and I think is kind of tapped into our subconscious, really, which is this idea that as we get older, we need to rest more, we need to conserve energy. And it's that whole image of, you get your slippers on and you take it easy. That's what you do. That's going to help you in later life, is just slowing down. When you retire, you take it easy. I mean, there's a balance there, because I can see with my parents, you tire more as you age. But what does that balance look like to you?
Absolutely. I think rest should be accompanied with a controlled application of a positive stress. It shouldn't be just on its own recurrently day after day, because recurrent rest will lead to deconditioning, which will accelerate aging. And we see this time and time again. Like, one of the big concerns when someone has a big procedure, like a surgical procedure, or they've had an illness, is not particularly the impacts of the illness per se, but the impact that deconditioning has. And as you get older, that impact is greater. So, for example, when you see patients when they've left hospital after a period of admission, the loss of muscle mass is huge. And it tends to be that actually impacts their lifespan going forward, rather than the pneumonia that they had and recovered from. It's the loss of muscle mass, which then means they're less able to get out of their house, their world starts shrinking, they're more likely to have a fall and break something, and the mortality vastly increases. And so I cannot stress enough that rest should be as a response to a controlled stress. So if, for example, you had a day where you went out hiking and you really enjoyed it, absolutely. Next day, have some rest to ensure that your body adapts to that. Because if, for example, you went out hiking every single day, you will find that your body can't keep up with the recovery and you will build up fatigue, build up potential issues with injuries. So yes, rest is beautiful if it's there for the right purpose, which is after a period of stress. And so you want to build in that cycle where throughout the week you have periods where maybe you're more active and the periods where you're recovering and focusing on trying to adapt and improve. And then over time, that's that remedy. Do not feel like as we get old, we should stop moving, because one of the key reasons why we see this acceleration in frailty is because that attitude of I'm now a bit older, I now need to move a bit less. And actually, we can play a role in that, because Sir Muir Gray, which is a colleague of mine and an absolute champion in this space, a clinician in his early 80s, he said that carers are sometimes one of the most harmful people for older people. And when he meant carers, he didn't mean professional carers. He's talking about family members and people that do things, going, oh, I'll do that for you. I'll put the shopping away. Oh, don't worry about getting off the chair. I'll get that. You are robbing them from the very thing that's going to keep them healthy for longer. So instead of carers, he says that we should abolish that. We should be enablers. What can I do to help you get that? If, for example, it's challenging or difficult. What can I do to enable you to go to the cafe if maybe you don't feel confident enough to get out the house? Let's enable more activity rather than remove, through a caring, positive place, the very activity that they need to be doing.
And so interesting that you mentioned hospital there, because that came onto my radar only in the last couple of months. And I thought, of course, the first time I heard it was at a longevity conference. And one of the scientists there had been doing some research around why we need to be feeding older people more protein when they're in hospital. You know, the nutrition there is not helping them because they're losing muscle. And then I interviewed recently a physiotherapist who had had to invent a device to support patients in their bed. It's like a resistance device that they can use to build muscle in their legs, because she had noticed exactly as what you say.
And I understand why, but it sounds crazy. But the nurses encourage people to not get out of the bed because they're worried that if they get out of the bed, they have a fall, it's their fault and they will get in trouble for this patient having an injury. And it's such a shame that we've got into this kind of culture where, although the nurses know that it would be great for the patients to walk around the ward, maybe to go down to the cafe, they are petrified of a negative outcome that could happen, and it's their jobs on the line. My father was in hospital not too long ago, and I had to literally wrestle him out of the ward into the cafe because I knew he was capable. And I literally said, look, if anything happens, it's all on me. It is not on you. Yes. I will happily write it in the notes for you, because that was the thing they were worried about. It wasn't that they didn't think he was capable. They were just worried that, he would get out of bed and have a fall. And so we need to definitely work on that side of things, that clinicians feel empowered and people are happy to take those risks, because there is always risk in life. You know what I mean? Whatever you do, there's always a potential risk. But there's also a risk of not doing something. And that is a definite risk. If they stay in bed, they're going to get the risk of the deconditioning and loss of muscle. If they get out of bed, yes, they're going to maybe protect that. And maybe there's a risk that they will have a fall if that happens. But if we can support them, we can guide them and let them take that choice, saying it's up to you. You can decide which risk you want to take. I know that I would rather take the risk of maybe having a fall rather than the definite risk of 100% being deconditioned when I get out of hospital.
Well, I could easily continue this conversation for another hour, but that's for another day. I so appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
So with those myths about aging firmly dispelled, let's remember we can make the changes today that will improve our tomorrow. Let us know in the comments if you've been held back by some of the common misconceptions we discussed and what you took from today's episodes, because I do love to hear your thoughts and opinions. And if you haven't already, then do hit subscribe or follow to keep up with the latest from us on the Honest channel. And if you'd like to access more from me, including regular vlogs and behind the scenes content, then you'll find a link below to join the channel as a member. And if you want a monthly dose of healthy aging inspiration delivered straight to your inbox, make sure to sign up for my newsletter where I share my latest episodes and articles so you don't miss out. But for now, until next time, thanks for being here today.